I'm here to tell you you've done a great job, but I want to give you some ideas so you can go to the next level. And particularly, the next level has a lot to do with why one goes about innovation, and that's the future. I got started on this line of work working with the U.S. Conference of Mayors because they came to me and said, we're beginning to see that all of this technological change that you, among others, are responsible for is really challenging the underlying assumptions of cities. So how do we ensure the economic viability of cities in the year 2030? And this is sort of really the part of the answer. So first of all, white plan for the future. A shout out to all Canadians here who love hockey. Wayne Gretzky, the great hockey player, plays where the puck will be, not where it is. This is particularly important for those of you involved with government, because government activity takes a while to accomplish. It would be embarrassing if you had a project that got done in 10 years that was perfect for the year 2012, but not the year 2022. And the other on the bottom I think is important because oftentimes people hear about technologies and they wonder, well, when's this ever going to happen? And in fact, it does take a while. There's this famous S-curve for the adoption of innovations. When it does happen, it happens very rapidly and the impact is very great. You need to be prepared for that. And as I said, in terms of government itself, this is particularly important. And so what you need to do is to start down that road to the economic future, the future of your communities. Today, the hunters, as they say, the other version of Wayne Gretzky, aim where the geese will be when the shot arrives, not where they are now. Okay, so let's talk about absolute basics of economic growth. This is going back to Adam Smith and the early economist. Two major things. This is not dealing with tax policy, all the other side issues, but the fundamental issues are people specialize. And if I can do something that all of you need and I can do it better than the rest of you, then I can produce more of that good or service, and you all get the benefit of that, and you in turn do the best things you can. The second is creation of new knowledge and innovation. This is not just true. Since computers were invented, this has been a fundamental of economic life forever. And it's creating new ideas, and obviously that increases productivity. In the 20th century, in the industrial era, cities were the economic engines. They were the centers of innovation because they brought people together. And the reason that was important is all of this stuff depends on collaboration and communications among people. And there was this virtuous cycle, as the economists like to say, of attracting people who did more stuff, more innovations, and they attracted more people, and it all went all the way through. And business clusters developed. And I love this picture. This is from Hollywood in 1922. Now, for those of you who don't know much about cinema history, in 1922, there were no color movies, there was no sound in movies, they weren't even all that popular. Yet, you still had this clustering effect back then during the industrial age. But things are changing, and this is where some of your assumptions are going to start to get challenged. Paul Krugman won the Nobel Prize a few years ago, a Nobel Prize in economics, and he won it for work on what was called the New Economic Geography, which was really the fundamental economic research that was the foundation for the idea of business clusters. But by the time he accepted his prize, in his acceptance speech, he said, "Thank you very much. We thought we discovered something very important a couple of decades ago, but it's not as true anymore." The clustering effect is weakening. And in fact, even if you take the most famous cluster in the world right now, which is Silicon Valley, it doesn't even scale in comparison to sort of one of the mediocre clusters that used to exist, for example, Akron, Ohio, which was once upon a time the center for rubber tire manufacturing. There's another study done of 300,000 businesses in the state of Pennsylvania, not that far from here, and basically found, again, there is no effective clustering effect in terms of growth. This is not just in the US. I came across a study from Norway, and the same thing about business clusters seem to be less relevant as drivers of innovation than has been commonly assumed. You won't be surprised by this fact, considering that the economy is global and we communicate globally, but nevertheless, I think it's important to say this because a lot of times people in regional governments and local governments talk about economic development and they're talking about clusters. It's an old idea that unfortunately has weakened. And here's an example, and I love this. This is, those of you who know anything about New York, there's a classic song called New York, New York. Frank Sinatra made this particular line famous, and the idea was that if you really wanted to be successful, you had to do it in New York. Now, I'm a native New Yorker. and I like to believe that too. But the reality is changing. So this was, came out a couple of years ago. The New York Stock Exchange, which is only a couple of miles away from here, found over the last decade or more that it's lost more than half of its market share in the trading of securities. One of the competitors that it lost to is a place called the Bats Exchange. The Bats Exchange is headquartered about 14 miles outside of Kansas City, Kansas. If those of you who don't know that, because you don't know the U.S. geography all that well, including Americans, it's in the middle of the country. It's in the middle of the country. It's not even in the large city of that metropolitan area. And I will tell you, again, for those of you who may not be familiar, if you've been involved with finance and you grew up and you're anything over the age of 25, you never thought that Lenexa, Kansas was a center of high finance. But it is today. And actually, that's a follow-up story here, which I just think is funny. And Associated Press had this story about a year ago. And it starts, what do you do when a cathedral of capitalism becomes antiquated? You turn it into New York's best party space. I've actually been to parties on the Florida Stock Exchange. And it's sort of funny. There's actually a larger message here I want you to think about, and you'll see examples of this as I go along. And that is, cities are changing from being centers of concentrated economic production to centers of consumption and a new kind of urban experience. They are party space in a sense. And there are other examples. This is research done at Michigan State University in which the economist who did this said, you know, in the industrial era, the largest cities were the richest cities. Detroit is our classic example in the US. But in this era, it's the best connected cities, regardless of their size. Now, some like New York are quite well connected, and so they're doing well, but Detroit is not, and it's not doing well. Okay, the other factor here is the services economy. In the year 1900 in the US, as an example, 71% of the American population, the American workforce, was in the business of making things or food. 100 years later, it had switched. And most people, a large percentage of people, were in services, and increasingly in intangible services, digital kind of services. Again, not just in the US. The European Union has closely followed in this trend, as is the rest of the world. Even China, although it hasn't even left its industrial age, is already talking about this. And because of the shift to the service economy out of the manufactured economy, cities all over the place decided they needed to have the equivalent of factories, office buildings, right? These were the factories of the service economy, and they built every one of these places. Some of these are quite small. Cities of 50,000 who thought the necessity of having a skyscraper with an office building to show off, they too were in that service economy. Where did all the office workers go? This is an example. I was actually in London, where Cisco has offices in what they call the city, the financial district, in an 8-story building, very modern, glass all over the place. 5 of the floors were empty. There's a recent report by Jones Lang LaSalle, a major real estate company, and they point out 40% of IBM employees work at a location other than an office at IBM. Same thing is true for Cisco, and it's not just IT companies. And everybody would think, oh, it's technology companies, sure. But it's all sorts of places. Anybody who's in the business of an intangible service can work anywhere. And that's an increasing percentage of our population. So much so that Jones Lang LaSalle said, you know, the current rule of thumb was 200 square feet per employee. That's going down to 50 square feet per employee. Now, for those of you who are in cities and depend a lot on commercial real estate as a sign of your success, this is a warning sign. And why is this? Part of the reason is we have a lot of communications everywhere. And if you think about it, the more people who are involved in creating and providing information and can do this on the internet, the more options they have. You know, I've argued in another place that the internet and what we do today has not had as rapid an increase, has not had as great an effect, not as rapid an increase in speed as the invention of the telegraph. But the telegraph was in an industrial economy where the impact couldn't be as great because people were still doing a lot of physical things. That's not true any longer, and so any improvement in communications today has a dramatic ripple effect throughout the economy. Part of it is starting at home. I don't know how many of you work from home at all, But this has really been driving this whole communications revolution. People have all kinds of capacity in their home, and in your communities in particular. I think all of you have some degree of broadband. A lot of people have this capability, and it's not just in the home. It's in other places and allows for interesting stories like this. It's a small little town in Wyoming, an even more remote place than Lenexa, Kansas. And this little town called Ten Sleep, it's an adorable name, right? 300 people, they're connected to the world, and their teachers are teaching students in Asia how to speak English. This picture I love, and it gives you an example of business services. There was this cartoon in a magazine here, maybe 10 years ago, that said, "On the internet, nobody knows you're a dog." And it had a picture, a dog and sitting in front of a computer terminal, right? Well, obviously that's not true. But on the internet, nobody knows that you are an Indian entrepreneur providing services to a company in the US or in Europe, and you're working out of an internet shack, which is what this place was, filled with young entrepreneurs. And we are just at the beginning. If you think about where we are in the progression, I know a lot of people think we've matured and we have the internet everywhere. We're nowhere near where this thing's going to be. If you compare it to where, say, the telephone system is today versus, say, 1920, we're in like the year 1920 for the internet compared to what's going to happen. And particularly in terms of video. So we obviously know about Cisco's telepresence. And this has been increasing rather rapidly in the corporate world, and you can create these immersive conference rooms. But it's not just in a business setting like that. You can do the same thing outdoors. So you can have a park in your city that can speak to somebody who's in a park in London, for example. It's being driven in all kinds of fun ways that you don't think about. One of the fastest growing groups on the internet are seniors, partly for this reason. They want to be able to talk to the grandkids and have fun with them. And it's all over the place. You got Google Hangouts, you got FaceTime on the Apple iPhone, and Facebook, of course, has their video chat. In fact, one of the original founders of Facebook announced a few days ago they have a new video chat service. So, this is happening all over the place, and the reason for it is the importance of nonverbal communications. The text of the words that you are communicating is a very small portion of what actually gets communicated. With video, you can see the rest. You can see if somebody is shaking, you can see if they're smiling, and all that sort of stuff. And so when we get to the point where video, high quality video, is ubiquitous, is everywhere, that's going to have a dramatic effect on the kinds of things we can do. Right now, you need to be in this room. If I want to meet with somebody, more often than not, I've got to get on an airplane and meet them face to face. When we have this ubiquitous video and the quality is there and it's easy, it doesn't get in the way, that kind of thing is going to change. As I said, we're just at the beginning of this. This was a concert in Paris, France, the Black Eyed Peas, famous for this one song, as far as I know. And it was on French television. It was a big deal. There was only one problem. 2 of the 4 singers couldn't get there. So they were delivered by a holographic-like telepresence. This is the kind of world that we're beginning to get into, where it's not just sort of on a screen in a corporate office, but it can be everywhere when I'm talking about ubiquitous video communications. Okay, so not yet today, but you're going to have it, and this is an important factor. So how does this change economic patterns? Well, okay, let's quickly go through the old economy rules. Economic activity was tied to a dedicated place, a factory or an office, or a store, a farm, right? And big companies would concentrate employments, and as a result, governments all over the world provided incentives to big employers. They said, we'll give you lots of money if you come here, build your factory or office building, and create 1,000 jobs or 10,000 jobs or whatever the number is. Markets were often very local, which is where the concept of the clustering came about. And quality of life was traded off for the sake of growth. And you see this today. In China and India, they are ramping up their industrial growth. And the Chinese have said, we understand pollution's a bad thing, but this is what's necessary to get richer. So we'll put up with it now, and then we'll deal with it later. Things are changing on that. Big companies can no longer be the source of lots of jobs because they're really disaggregated. They're all over the place. And the bottom, and these are some obscure references, but I want to explain them. Ronald Coase was a Nobel Prize winning economist, and he won for his work on what's called the theory of the firm. And the question was, why in a capitalist society, when you had this marketplace, did these big industrial companies develop during the industrial age? His answer was it was less expensive for people to collaborate with each other within the corporation than to have to go to the marketplace every single time they needed something, right? So it reduced transaction costs. Clay Shirky, who is a faculty member at NYU, wrote a book a couple of years ago called Here Comes Everybody. And he said the internet now provides that same kind of collaborative capability, that same kind of organizational glue. And he obviously gave some famous examples like Wikipedia, but there are all kinds of other examples. So now we're entering that age where you don't need the big monolithic corporation. There are other alternatives to doing that, and people are taking advantage of those. And this means that big incentives don't guarantee jobs anymore. Now, this is from the US during the worst of the recession. So you have the politicians with the ribbon cutting in April, and the place closes in December. And yeah, that was the worst of it. But frankly, this has been going on for a long time. A lot of the studies show these incentives have they just don't work anymore because the big companies aren't moving jobs. The classic example is Accenture, which moved their world headquarters to Dublin. And after some initial excitement, the mayor of Dublin realized that they were hardly moving any jobs at all. The CEO for Accenture stayed in Boston. The COO stayed in Austin, Texas. The employees stayed where they were. They were a global company connected by the global communications network. They had no reason to move lots of people. And even manufacturing, which started all this idea that you had concentrated employment, that's even getting decentralized through the development of 3D printing. Okay, so the individual increasingly becomes a sort of key unit of activity, and oftentimes in fluid kinds of teams. The old style in that big industrial plant was one CEO for 50,000 employees. The new style is one CEO maybe for 50 employees or even 5. And so it requires a shift in thinking on your part. So the future economy rules. The connected home will oftentimes be the place to work and to buy and to be entertained, no longer just a single dedicated space. The strategy here more economic developers talking about these days is economic gardening. Growing what's there already. And it also means that there's really now a great divide between commercial real estate development and economic growth. It's not the equivalent thing that it used to be. Businesses are going global. They're not clustering locally anymore. And quality of life becomes a part of your economic development strategy. It's not just a trade-off any longer. Laws of economics don't change. I'm not suggesting anything of the kind. There's a new economy, but it's not new economic rules. The difference is that physical proximity is no longer going to be the only or the dominant way to connect people. Okay, so what's the response? What kind of response can you be? Well, in working with mayors here and other places, we've sort of come up with 3 parts to a new economic strategy. And first, though, it's important to ask yourself this question, because I want you to think about the economic situation clearly. How do you measure your community's economic success going forward? Is it the total revenues of companies that might happen to have a postal address? I know I hear a lot about this when I meet with mayors and they say, oh, we have such and such company headquartered in our town. And then I ask the embarrassing question, well, so actually, how many employees do they have there? It's not very many. Or is your measure of economic success the amount of income and wealth of your residents? And that's really where I'm going with this is that measure, that second one is the real one. And so part of the key question is when a lot of people can work anywhere, where will they choose to live and work? Number 1, with the theme of this event, build an innovation platform to increase the income potential of your residents. And there are lots of ways you can do it now. First, you need to understand how innovation occurs in this world. It is a collaborative act. The idea that there's some genius sitting somewhere far away on the top of a mountain coming up with the next great idea is false. And you want to take a look I'd recommend reading Stephen Johnson's book, Where Good Ideas Come From. As he puts it, this is how innovation happens. Chance favors the connected mind. Einstein was a little bit more jaundiced about it, and he said the secret to creativity is knowing how to hide your sources. Right? So you have to understand this is a collaborative act. It gets back to the same point I made earlier about economic growth. And there's been all kinds of success stories about this. The work on Alzheimer's has developed dramatically because of a collaboration and a break from the traditional, very private and proprietary research that was done on previous diseases. There's a whole open innovation movement that the internet has enabled. Procter & Gamble, a big company, a consumer products company, worldwide, has been one of the leaders. Cisco's been involved with this. Netflix gave an iPrize out to people to figure out the best algorithm. There's just all kinds of examples. There's something called the Innova Hub, Idea Connection, yet to come. There's all this support out there to help people get this. And then it's important that people stay in the stream of new ideas. Most of us assume that it's only 20-somethings who can be creative. The reality is that people actually get more creative as they get older in lots of ways because they have a broader life experience. They can put those diverse experiences together and come up with new ideas. Except they can't reach their potential if they're no longer in this stream of new ideas. So if you want to help them reach that, you need to take advantage of all the stuff that's out there. MIT, Stanford, all kinds of universities have put their courses online. It's available mostly for free. And even places that aren't officially universities, all these other places offer all kinds of training and education in video. YouTube even has YouTube University, as they call it. And so if you need to learn something, if you need to know some new idea, you can get it. And the next thing is to connect your entrepreneurs to the global economic ecosystem. It has certainly been true in most advanced economies that most of the job growth has actually come from entrepreneurs growing new companies. The large companies have, on balance, had no net job growth over the last couple of decades. So this is important. And again, connectivity makes a difference. This is a research report done at the United Nations about what was the most successful public works projects. What he had in mind when he initially did this were a lot of the highway projects that, for example, gave farmers access to their markets and allowed them to get richer. But this is true even in the internet age where the connectivity is the kind that you people have all invested in. And you can do all sorts of fun stuff. You can expand your community virtually. This was actually an idea from Australia to connect all the Chinatowns in the world virtually. So you could walk through them. And you can do the same thing for your community. Take all of the points of economic activity and get them out as one to get your story across. Okay, great universities. I go around and people say, oh, we're trying to create a Stanford in our backyard so we can do here what they did with Silicon Valley. It was a great model for Silicon Valley. It's not easily transferable. It took a long time for Stanford to become Stanford. It didn't happen overnight. The great thing about this is you don't need to do that because the research going on in Stanford and in MIT and Princeton and these other great research universities is mostly available to your entrepreneurs on the internet. They already know how to commercialize stuff. They don't need to teach academics to commercialize it. What you need to do is get them access to this stuff. And even the best universities, like Poly, make sure that their students are connected not just to the research of their own faculty, but to the research happening everywhere else in the world. It's possible to do that now. Libraries are a very cost-effective way of doing this, and one of the things that I've done with both in the US and in Europe is to encourage local government leaders to use that public library as almost the virtual reference librarian for the entrepreneurs who can't afford to have their own corporate library. But this could be a place where somebody goes in and say, hey, I'm going to be making a presentation about some business proposal to a chemical engineering firm. How can I get real educated about chemical engineering in a short time? And they can help figure that out. You can connect entrepreneurs to the flow of capital. There are all kinds of new funding ideas that are aware of this. And you know, this is something that I think that is now possible again because of the internet. You don't necessarily need to have all of your local venture capitalists, and this is more and more true. The hidden secret of Silicon Valley is not the great engineers. There are great engineers everywhere. The hidden secret is the actual business support community that understands the technology business. It's the investors and marketers who don't get upset when they, investors and financiers who don't get upset when they see a spreadsheet from a software company. It doesn't look anything like a spreadsheet for an investment in a building. You know, it's the lawyers who understand intellectual property. It's all those support services. Well, a lot of that now is available again if you are connected. And you need to make sure that your entrepreneurs in your community are connected so they can take advantage of that. The United States became a great agricultural power because the government did something called an agricultural extension service that was in the business of diffusing innovations. It helped farmers understand the next great innovation. You can do the same thing today for your businesses, and in fact can use a lot of the unemployed college students in all of your countries. who understand this and get the word out. Okay, and there's even this, I love this kind of businesses trying to pick up on this. Startup Nomads was a project in which you combine people to do exactly this sort of thing worldwide. Okay, number 3, create a new quality of life, a new experience of living in your community. And this is important. Remember I said quality of life is very important. What you used to do to attract tourists to your area, you're going to need to do to keep people in your area now. And quality of life means very many different things. We all know what we don't want, but it can be different things in each place. So I would tell you, don't copy each other. There was a time, for example, everybody wanted to have an artist colony. Well, you know, you can't all do it equally. Figure out what you're really good at and keep it going. And quality of life, by the way, does include citizen experience. It's not just putting your services online. It's engaging the citizens so they say, this is a place where I participate, where I want to be. I am committed and loyal to this community. And you get the benefit because you gain the wisdom of your residents. And those of you who are elected officials, the nice thing about this is that people begin to understand the complexity of the issues you're dealing with. They get to be more on your side and less frequently criticize you because now they're part of the process. Oops, sorry. And this, I'm giving this example called Betaville, developed on this campus at the Experimental Media Center, which is part of Poly. This was a way that people could collaborate together to respond to different urban design ideas and provide their own. And it's the kind of thing where you get people involved early and they can work together. This is a version of what we heard about last night, citizen-to-citizen services, where you're not actually delivering the services directly, but as the government leader, you're facilitating citizens help each other. This is an example in the area of Parks and Recreation. We heard from Mexico last night about how they did this with the taxi cab drivers. Okay, then you also can make new destinations that blend physical and virtual spaces. Remember, we're going to this new world. It's not all virtual. We all still have our physical bodies. We're not going to be living in the Matrix movie. And so there's this combination of stuff that you can do. And partly you need to realize that the old computer model is out. So walls become screens and you can interact in ways that don't require a keyboard. And even floors become interactive displays. And this, this is sometimes very simple. This was in the second largest city in Denmark, in the public library there. They just said, hey, we want to do community art. You know, we need to put something on the walls. People came in with their smartphones and they worked together and created this art. And when they liked it sufficiently, they sort of took a snapshot of it and put it up on a wall as the community digital art. The library didn't have to do anything. The city didn't have to do anything. People did it itself, but they gave them the place to have this new kind of urban experience. You have walls you can touch. And it's not just fixed displays anymore. This comes from Germany, where you can move things around, change them. So again, a wall, anything, in any of your facilities can become a part of this new experience. This isn't, let me turn it down. This was in Times Square, and basically where you combine the people on the street with a digital display. And this really does blend that physical and virtual experience together in a way that was attractive. This became so successful, the New York Police Department asked them to change the angle of the screen because the traffic was getting congested. Australia, piano stairs. The public health people didn't want to have people take the escalators that are getting too fat. So they painted the stairs, and as you stepped on each one of these stairs, it was connected to, again, to the internet, and the sound came out, and people thought this was great, and they start dancing on these stairs. You know, it just takes imagination. You already have the connectivity. These are some ways you can use it to drive a new kind of urban experience. Augmented reality, I think you've seen some of this stuff, but your city should have this kind of app that helps people understand the details of what it is that they're seeing. Even a Spanish company came out with iPavement. So this is a new kind of pavement. It's connected to the internet. It has a Bluetooth connection, so as you're walking down the street, you're permanently connected. It's not just flat, by the way, for those of you who have actually control the sort of street furniture of your cities. There are flexible displays. You can wrap these things around lamp poles. I showed you the holograph before. The Japanese, as part of their 2022 World Cup proposal, said, you know, we know in the game of soccer or football, depending upon where you come from, There is no seat in the stadium that's perfect because the action moves all over. So what we're going to do is give you a holographic representation you can have in front of you so you can see it at all different angles. They were convinced that this would not be a difficult problem for them to handle in the next 10 years. So this stuff is coming. Why not in your stadiums? All right, conclusion. The transition to the future won't be simple, right? But you need to plan for the future way people will earn their living because it takes a while for what you do to have an impact. You need to shift some investments. I'm not telling anybody to drop everything you've been doing in all the incentive programs, but you need to shift some of those investments so you start placing some bets on the future too. You build both the physical and communications infrastructure and the human infrastructure. And the way you do this is you can offer video and collaboration platform for innovation. You can link to a global ecosystem, not just a local cluster, but to a global ecosystem. You can link your entrepreneurs, and that will get you some dependable economic growth. And you can provide people a quality experience so that they stay and they're excited about being in your community. And that's going to be the secret to your future success. Now, take a look at the picture. This is an example, somebody getting out of the boat onto the dock. That dock represents the future. Make sure you built it firmly so you don't fall in the water on the way through the transition. Thank you very much.